Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you all today. As Stacey said, my name is Kristen, and I work at Knewton. Knewton's goal is to personalize lessons for students around the world. As a member of our business development team, I focus on identifying and forming partnerships with high-quality publishers who have or are building digital products that they'd like to make adaptive. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how the data generated in digital courses can benefit learners, instructors, and content creators. First, we'll talk at a high level about data and education. Then we'll look at how the use of data can drive greater returns on investment for the consumer, be that the end learner or, in the case where there is another buyer of the product, like a school or a parent, whomever it is who is trying to promote learning gains. We'll also discuss, which I hope you'll all find particularly compelling, how data can drive ROI for publishers. First, in terms of encouraging better user experiences, and then specifically in terms of encouraging a better informed content development process. At the risk of stating the obvious, it's worth establishing up front how critically important education is. Education drives virtually every other problem we face in the world. Improve education, and we make it easier to solve all other problems, from reducing poverty to protecting the environment. Knewton exists because we believe the deft use of data will position publishers and teachers to improve educational experiences, and that in doing so, we can help countless students learn more. Since you joined this call, I'm going to assume you believe this too. Knowing more has a very real, positive set of implications for students, regardless of their age. And those of us at Knewton sincerely believe this and are committed to figuring out how to use data as effectively as possible to this end. If you look at the history of education, the most crucial developments have been those that increased access. Modest access early on with the Platonic Academy, broader access, though reserved to Europe for quite some time with the printing press, and then a significant bump when education became compulsory in many countries, opening schooling up to a much broader swath of society and leading to the rise of an educated middle class. Today, education around the world is undergoing a historic shift from print to digital. The shift of education from analog to digital is a one-time event in the history of the human race. At scale, it will trump the impact of the educational revolutions that preceded. Okay, let me explain what I mean. The internet does two things really well: distribution and data mining. The movement of both materials and actual classes online allows for much broader and cheaper distribution. This shift is happening, albeit at variable pacing, around the world. This is fantastic for learners, but those of us in the industry would be forfeiting a tremendous opportunity if we allowed this shift to digital to be solely about a change in format and an increase in consumption. That's because as materials move online, we're able to accurately capture data for the first time. We can analyze data as students study to figure out what a student knows and needs to work on, and then we can use this information to personalize lessons. This is a tremendous opportunity to help learners because until now, all this information was completely lost as students studied offline with static print textbooks or handouts that we're all used to. Other media industries have been disrupted by the internet. The companies you see represented here have all already had their internet moments. They changed the way we consume information, socialize, listen to music, discover books and movies, and so on. First, by distributing content widely and increasing access, but then secondly, by analyzing data to personalize the experience for each individual customer. Now, education is in the process of being similarly disrupted. Data mining in education, we believe, will prove to be particularly powerful. We expect this because data in education is unique for three core reasons. The first, massive amounts of student data can be collected, which is to say nearly every action a student takes within a digital learning application is telling the system something about what that student knows and how well she knows it. Number two, content and the related interactions can be broken down into smaller chunks. We're able to look at individual content items, questions, passages, etc., which gives us a level of precision much greater than, say, Netflix can achieve when contending with a show or a video as the unit of interaction. Third, concepts are highly correlated, allowing Knewton to infer student performance in related concepts. In other words, performance on one concept should give us a strong sense of how well a student would do on those concepts that are prerequisite and those that are postrequisite. The correlations in education are much stronger than, say, those between items purchased on Amazon. In other words, the fact that I'm proficient in isosceles triangles should tell the system something reliable about my ability to tackle equilateral triangles, whereas my purchase of a pair of shoes on Amazon, for the sake of argument, might indicate something about my preference for shoes in general, although I could be buying for multiple members of my family. And it's unlikely that it tells you much, the system much, about my preference in vacuum cleaners. All this to say, the education data that we're able to gather tells us an awful lot. Knewton's mission is to bring personalized learning to the world. I want to step back quickly and explain the perspective I'm bringing to these questions about data and education coming from Knewton. Recognizing the potential for data in education, as well as the complexity of soundly gathering and analyzing it, Knewton is focused on making the use of data to improve learning outcomes possible for as many education experience providers as we can. We've built a heavy-duty infrastructure to support ongoing data collection and analysis, and we've created APIs to make it easy for our partners, typically publishers like many of you, to access our platform and embed adaptivity in their products. Knewton will reach 6 million students in 2014 across 4 continents: North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. 21 education companies and institutions across K-12, higher ed, and continuing ed are using Knewton within a variety of subject domains: math, reading, writing, English, French, business, economics, finance, biology, chemistry, physics, anatomy, language learning, sociology, nursing, and more. Any improvement over the linear print textbook experience that digitization has enabled or will enable is certainly a welcome advance. At Knewton, we have structured our platform to allow for a highly personalized path through learning materials. On the left, you see a stylized version of adaptivity where a learner's path is dictated by a rules-based engine. Here, the direction does not account for an evolving view of my needs as a student, but instead relies on a finite set of predetermined learning paths. For example, I answered question 4 wrong, so I will be brought to this particular piece of content next. Knewton, on the other hand, stylized on the right, combines student proficiency data in the moment and longitudinal with inferred content parameters to provide real-time personalized learning. In this case, again, I've answered question 4 wrong, but the system is considering that piece of content's relationship to other pieces of content, making inferences about my level of engagement, needs for remediation, pacing, target score, target date for mastery, and other factors. Knewton's ranking available content and positioning the partner to deliver the next best thing for me to work on. So how does real-time personalized learning improve the return on invested time in a learning app for the user, your customer? First, let's acknowledge why personalization is necessary. Students have different natural abilities, interests, and study habits, and they're working often toward different goals. Accommodating students' variable needs is a tall and often exhausting task for even the most talented teacher. Providing a differentiated experience where the lesson is tailored to the individual student improves learning outcomes. Each moment devoted to study and practice is more efficiently spent because the student is getting what she needs. Students are more engaged and much less likely to fall through the cracks. Analyzing data can make differentiation more feasible and more accurate. Data analysis can optimize content delivery in a digital textbook. Thoughtful recommendations surface the next best piece of content for a learner, creating a dynamic textbook while increasing the return on a moment invested in the learning product. Data can also provide useful analytics to inform teacher action. Instructors get a quicker and more accurate view of where their students are relative to learning goals. And these instructors are therefore in a better spot to intervene effectively with the students who need it most, maximizing return on each moment they spend with a given student or group of students. Teachers can immediately identify skills gaps for students in need of help or find more challenging activities for the advanced students. We've been happy to find that personalized learning in action works. Students at universities around the world, in this example, use Pearson's MyMathLab with Knewton Adaptive Learning. MyMathLab's adaptive study plan serves as a personalized tutor for each student, reinforcing important concepts and allowing teachers to see each student's progress toward learning objectives. The Reading Area Community College result highlighted here, a more than 11 percentage point bump in exam scores, is emblematic of results across institutions using this product. In another Knewton-powered partner product, students experienced up to a half-grade improvement when using adaptive assignments as supplements to their normal coursework. The study looked at the impact of adaptive assignments for tens of thousands of learners in hundreds of schools using 9 different Knewton-powered digital textbook titles. These textbooks covered subjects including anatomy and physiology, biology, chemistry, and physics. The study controlled for effort, ability, and other factors. The results here are especially encouraging because these particular courses were built on an earlier version of the Knewton platform and only recommend practice items. When digital products use data smartly and have sophisticated personalization, ROI grows for the students using them, the teachers instructing with them, and the institutions that have selected them. Here we're looking at results for Arizona State University, who offered a Knewton-powered remedial math course to students who failed to place into freshman-level math. This was a significant problem area because students who didn't pass this math course were at a particularly high risk of dropping out from college. After 2 semesters of use with over 2,000 developmental math students, we saw a meaningful bump in pass rates, a 56% decline in withdrawals, and a significant portion of students, almost half as you'll see here, finishing the course early, which previously had not been an option. All in, ASU recouped $12 million in tuition over this period of time by retaining these high-risk students. Activity in a digital application is only one part of a meaningful learning experience. We at Knewton recognize this and believe it strongly. Data-enabled differentiated instruction improves ROI for all involved, making time in the digital app more valuable and freeing up classroom time for other activities crucial to a comprehensive learning experience, such as social collaboration, debates, and creative projects. So now let's get into ROI for the publisher. Digital learning applications are data-rich, and as discussed, inferences from the data can directly lead to benefits for the student through optimized content delivery and actionable analytics. Data can also be used to improve the return for publishers on the time and resources devoted to product development. Many publishers are now offering better, more personalized products that will use data to drive better learning outcomes. Knewton's partners, featured here, some of whom revised an existing digital project to incorporate ad activity, others who are building brand new products from the ground up, have used our integration process as an opportunity to revisit and revamp their product design. While their implementations are variable by subject matter, grade level, adaptive flow, and other considerations, these partners are all committed to offering data-driven, personalized education experiences. Data about the content itself, such as which lessons are effective for which kinds of students, can allow for more cost-effective, iterative publishing. If you think back to why data analyses in education are so effective, one of the factors isolated is the small chunk size, the fact that we're able to evaluate a paragraph, a sentence even, rather than the full chapter, for example. An adaptive learning product is looking at content in a much more modular way than even the most innovative publishing platforms. As data is accrued on content interaction and efficacy, resources to improve that content can be more thoughtfully deployed. Too much data can, of course, be overwhelming. Knewton is committed to delivering data to stakeholders in an actionable way, be this data learning analytics, descriptions of how students are doing, or content analytics, descriptions of how the content is performing. On the latter, let me get a bit more specific about how Knewton is thinking about this. Knewton's content analytics provide insight into the performance of assets within a learning application. Publishers regularly undertake content revision projects. In the absence of data, content development can be quite costly and resource intensive. It's like trying to shoot a dart at a bullseye in the dark. It's extremely difficult to know what's working and how close you are to creating a better product unless you measure it and can actually see. Content analytics are attempting to turn the light on in education publishing. Impact will, for the first time, be transparent. Content analytics can position publishers to be more strategic about their development efforts, curtailing costs and ultimately improving ROI. Featured here are the 3 core metrics we can already report on, what we're reporting on today. Assessment. How well do individual questions actually assess a student's knowledge? Instruction. How do different pieces of content contribute to learning? And finally, exhaustion. How much content are students using, and are they reaching intended levels of proficiency before they get through what's available? Let me walk you through what each of these metrics mean and how they can help publishers like you. So first up, assessment quality. Assessment quality data seek to answer the following questions. Which items tell us the most about student understanding? Do items assess the material they are meant to assess? Where do we need to add more reliable assessment content? The visual on the right shows an example of analysis that can be run on such data. Here, the green represents students who answered the question correctly, and the teal points are students who answered incorrectly. A good assessment question is discriminating, which is to say it can reliably predict overall concept proficiency. The hypothetical question featured here is good because there's a discernible gap between the majority of students getting it right, the green point, those who are highly proficient on the concept it assesses, and the students getting it wrong, the blue, who have the blue bump, who have low proficiency on the overall concept. If this gap were small or non-existent, it would indicate that the question is not accurately gauging proficiency on the aligned concept. It's important that assessment questions, I should mention on the previous slide, in publishers' courses are actually assessing student knowledge and progress, and the goal here is obviously that this would help them better understand. Okay, shifting gears to instructional impact. Instructional impact data seek to answer a similar set of questions but for instructional assets. Which items are reliably associated with learning? Which areas of content are effective at instruction? The visual on the right shows how proficiency, tracked on the y-axis, changes as students interact with items over time, the x-axis. The activity of 10 students is represented by the blue lines. The circles you see represent a particular instruction item. Since most students' proficiency level increases after engaging with this item, it can be reasoned that the item has positive instructional impact. Comparing the impact of various items can position publishers to determine what best practices should be replicated. These could be pedagogical approaches, format-specific considerations, and so on. When it comes to exhaustion, we're looking at how much content is being used and how that maps to outcomes. In other words, where do students run out of content? What material are students moving past without understanding? Where do we need to develop more content? In the graph on the right, each circle represents a cluster of content teaching the same concept. A given cluster might consist of 10 to 20 items, some instructional, some assessment. Exhaustion, mapped on the x-axis, refers to how much of the available content is being accessed by users on average. Those farthest on the right are exhausted. In other words, all 10 to 20 assets are likely being used. On the y-axis, we see the average level of proficiency achieved by students on the concepts each cluster is teaching. By comparing these two dimensions, we're able to isolate actionable insights. For example, those content clusters highlighted by the red circles are likely in need of work. Students are getting all the way through the available content without actually achieving concept mastery. Perhaps the associated concepts are particularly difficult, in which case more and better items are needed. What's clear is the given content pool is insufficient insofar as delivering the desired learning outcomes. If you consider quadrant 2, we're potentially viewing content areas that this hypothetical publisher should be promoting in its marketing efforts. Students are working their way through a good portion of the available content, and in doing so, they're managing to reach proficiency. If the aligned concept is viewed as especially challenging, the implication is that this publisher is very effective at teaching it, which might set them apart from competitors. The metrics described and others in development at Knewton are intended to provide direct value to publishers and eventual value to students and teachers who will ultimately benefit from the improved learning products available to them. In summary, through recommendations and actionable analytics, Knewton is using data to boost return on invested time and money for students, instructors, and publishers alike. Knewton's mission is to bring effective, personalized learning to students everywhere, and by working hand in hand with our growing list of publisher partners around the world to leverage data, we're getting closer to doing so every day. That's all from me. Stacy, if you want to open it up to Q&A.
Great, thank you, Kristen. So if you have a question, please type it down in the chat box. I have one here. The first question is, if a publisher is working right now outside of Knewton to start collecting data, there's so much information they should collect. How do they know what data to collect? How do they develop a plan for collecting that data?
It's a good question. I think when we initially start working with publishers, but actually throughout the duration of our partnerships, are often asking those questions and evolving the set of data that we care about. I would say at a high level, a governing principle should be, does knowing about this piece of data inform the experience we're providing to our learners, so the direct product experience, or inform the content that we'll ultimately be creating or revising. I think there's a lot of other noise that you can be tracking that actually, where you just take a step back and say, what does knowing this help me solve? What problem am I trying to solve by virtue of collecting this data? You'd be very unclear on the answer. So I think if you're able to step back and think about real things, and these three metrics I just spoke to on the content analytics front, to us are really directly answering that question, specifically on the content. You know, is this actually helping the product understand if a student knows this concept? Because if we know that, then we're able to determine whether they should do more work, what the nature of that additional work should be. Perhaps they do know the concept well, and we're able to move them on to enrichment to make sure that they stay engaged in our product. There's something really actionable about having a sense of of their actual proficiency, and knowing that that question can deliver us that sensibility. So I think it's really about looking at the universe of data that you're collecting and really defining what that metric itself is pointing to and how you can use the data.
Great, and then a follow-up that's come in is, how often should you review what data you're collecting from your materials?
I think that probably links to your own business practices. So we would hope that accurate and timely collection of data positions our partners to revise and improve their content more regularly. But generally, I think you want to be reviewing the data when you're in a position to do something about it. So I would think that data analysis should map to your content development and content revision cycles. And hopefully tools, Knewton's and others, will, again, position you to do that at a quicker clip than perhaps historically you've been able to do.
Okay, great. Let's see. Another question that has come in is, do you have any advice for people trying to talk to the schools about the data collection and the recent fears about student data privacy?
Sure. Yeah, privacy we take very, very seriously at Knewton for obvious reasons. And I think if you would like to really dive into Knewton's approach, there's actually a recent blog post from our CEO, Jose Ferreira, about our guiding principles when it comes to student data and privacy. But really the number one philosophy at Knewton is that the student's data belongs to that student. At a high level, we believe data should never be shared or sold without the explicit permission of that student, or in the case of a minor, the parent. That data should only be used to improve student outcomes, and that data ultimately must be very carefully protected in whatever format in which it's stored. So in terms of guidance to talking to schools or buyers of your product, I think really making it apparent, one, the seriousness with which you'll approach privacy issues, but also that the intention in collecting and storing data is entirely hinged on the improvement of student outcomes. I think we at Knewton certainly believe the onus is on us to be able to demonstrate efficacy, so that when we're having that conversation where privacy concerns are raised, we're able to very clearly point to the benefit of making use of data. Absent that, there's real questions around why you would bother to store it, to collect it in the first place. But as I've kind of walked through, hopefully in the presentation, the impact is real, and we need to be able to communicate that effectively.
Great. Okay, here's another one. Have you had any experience working with companies whose products have both paper and digital materials, and they need to collect the efficacy data?
We have. So a number of our partners, it's interesting. I think partners come to us, as I mentioned early on, either with an existing digital product that they'd like to make adaptive, or with the vision of building an adaptive product from the ground up. And in many cases, it might be their very first digital product. That was the case with Triumph Learning, one of our partners. We've recently launched with them the product Waggle, which is really a middle school ELA and math-focused product. And there, as the stories go, they literally walked in with a stack of papers and plopped them on the table and said, "This is our starting point." And we are really happy to work with publishers who are in that position, because that gives Knewton a seat at the table to collaborate in really defining that product vision, and allows us, there's so many steps that exist in getting an entirely offline product digitized. It's simple kind of translation steps that if Knewton in this case is working with that partner collaboratively, we're able to help inform certain aspects of the process that will allow the digital content to be more Knewton ready. Perhaps in the way that it's ingested and tagged and organized and the like. But yes, we've had definite experience where partners have either been exclusively offline or had portions of content that were offline that they wanted to bring into the fold. And we're really able to work with publishers at whichever stage they may be. Sometimes if there's just a lot of offline to online ingestion work to be done, it might lengthen the integration process.
Okay, great. I have another question that just came in regarding content analytics. So it's a two-parter. I'll give you the first part first.
Okay.
For the content analytics, do you use e-textbook, or is it only assessment content?
Okay. It's both assessment and instruction. So in the three metrics that I mentioned are what we've rolled out this fall, and so it's our first set, and we're building out kind of a portfolio of metrics that we intend to be able to deliver to our partners. Assessment quality would speak specifically to assessment assets. Instructional impact would speak to non-assessment items or purely instructional items. And then that exhaustion dimension would look at both formats and be looking at kind of an aggregate level at the concepts, which kind of a cluster of content, both assessment and instruction, might teach.
Okay, great.
That hopefully answers that question.
Yeah, the second part, and you may have already partially answered this, but on e-textbooks, what type of data do you collect, and how does it impact publishers to develop or update with new content?
Sure. Well, I guess I'd take a step back and say I'm picturing, with the definition of e-textbooks, kind of the e-reader ready version of the print textbook. And often when we're working with our partners, what we aim to do is really modularize the content, so that instead of looking at it at a full chapter as it would be read offline, getting as granular as we can within the content itself. So instead of a chapter level, perhaps drilling down to a paragraph or a few sentences that we are able to isolate and align to a very specific learning objective. That way, we're able to collect data that we think tells us something about the learner's abilities at a specific concept level, whereas when you're kind of looking at a higher grade chunk, at the chapter or even at the entire book, there are so many learning concepts attempting to be tackled by that content that data gathered about interaction with those assets at such a high level probably does not give us much insight into concept level proficiency. So we are able to be quite flexible in terms of the adaptive flow that our partners ultimately provide. But in most cases, we will try to, at the risk of coarse terminology, kind of chunk up the content so that we're talking about smaller pieces of textbook passages so that when we're delivering, for example, this instructional impact data, we can say that, you know, a student read this particular paragraph, and then after interacting with that, they were able to answer assessment questions on that specific concept with greater proficiency, and therefore the type of metric we'd be delivering back is that that particular passage was very effective, very good at teaching the aligned concept. And the same goes for videos or for graphics or simulations or any other type of instructional asset that you would want to deliver prior to assessing proficiency on a concept.
Great. Okay. So taking a different tact, I have a question. What's the role of the teacher in their comments or notes on how a student is using a product or how they're learning? How does that play in with the data that you're gathering? Or do the publishers not see that at all?
So it would depend on how the publisher's product, the interface ultimately exists. What we would be delivering back to our publishers is a set of learning analytics at the student level that can also be bubbled up to the class level, and then actually when you think of administrators can be bubbled up a layer higher. It is the publisher's decision, the product owner, as to how that data is rendered to the instructor. Our goal at Knewton is to provide metrics that would supplement basically the teacher's perhaps more anecdotal view. So a teacher could have a classroom experience and identify that a subset of students seems to be off track. The goal of Knewton's data would be to corroborate that view if that's the case, lend a level of accuracy based on what we've seen, and serve as either a sanity check or, in the absence of the teacher's formed view, inform them of how things are going in the classroom and basically give them the information they need to be really thoughtful about how they structure the class. So it might be topical. They might see that the class in general is struggling on a particular topic, and therefore they're going to devote the portion of the class that's a lecture to that topic. It might be structural. They see, as I was suggesting earlier, that there's a subset of students struggling. They might choose to break out that group into a small discussion and lead a conversation around that topic that's proving challenging. And instead of holding back the other students who perhaps are in a position to be enriched, allow those students to work on something else. So our data set isn't necessarily directly communicating with something that the teacher might upload, but our publishing partners, and in many cases our partners do this, they can create the tooling so that teachers can input analytics they care about and see Knewton-powered analytics side by side, ultimately in the service of just providing a richer data set so it's easier for them to manage the classroom, hopefully.
Great. Okay. And then I think a follow-up to that one looks like is, do teachers ever give you, or do you solicit input from teachers on what kind of data would be helpful to them in the classroom?
We do. Yeah, we actually have a number of former teachers on staff here, both providing subject matter expertise and that practical insight into how the product is being used in the classroom. So we rely, I think, on Knewton-specific expertise, but then very much so what our publisher partners believe is valuable based on their user design conversations, any type of focus groups or market research that they've conducted on their own. So when we start out in the partnership process, we typically hold a series of workshops with product folks, with editorial folks, sometimes with sales and marketing, and they will tell us what they view to be important. And that will certainly inform product design and inform the way in which analytics are delivered. And then we really ask for it and hope that our partners will also provide requests, feature requests that can inform our roadmap. You know, if there's a certain metric that they're hearing from teachers would be especially valuable, we want to know that, and we want to be able to scope how feasible it would be to build, and we want to factor that into our product roadmap so we can roll that out. So we very much hope not to be a vendor to our publisher partners, but instead a strategic partner that they're in constant dialogue with, sharing these insights that they're getting from teachers. And then separately, yes, we, aside from the teachers we have on staff, we hold a number of events with teachers, and through our blog posts and other means are kind of constantly trying to track what the latest needs are in the classroom and make sure that our product development's aligned.
Great. Okay, well, it looks like that's the end of the questions. So unless anyone has another question they'd like to type in, I just want to thank Kristen Weeks for her fantastic presentation. You can find out more about her and her company at Knewton.com. That's Knewton. The next event in our masterclass series will be an on-site workshop in Huntington Beach, California on January 28th, talking about making smart decisions and investments to allow you to meet your customers' needs. And on December 8th, we have our annual CEO Roundtable. I want to thank everyone for participating today, and if you have any more questions about our organization, please visit us at aepweb.org. Thank you.